America, John Stanton, Washington Bureau Chief of BuzzFeed.com, and Emily Tish Sussman, Campaign Director at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Good to be in.
Dr. Lillis, I wanted to start with you. You both know Dr. Murthy personally. You've been twisting some arms on Capitol Hill to find out what's going on here. Did I get the story basically right, and what's the latest that's going on the Hill?
Well, the latest that's going on the Hill is in the wake of the vote for the Department of Justice nominee, there's not a broad appetite to take another difficult vote. But those of us in the health community don't believe this should be a difficult vote. The American College of Physicians, the American College of Surgeons, the American College of Emergency Physicians all have publicly said very same and similar things that we did at Doctors for America during those letter writing campaigns. If you've been in the emergency room and you've seen a victim of gunshot wound victim, if you've been in the intensive care unit and seen someone cling to life, you understand that gun violence is a serious problem. But that being said, in his Senate Health Committee hearing, Dr. Murthy was very clear. He wants to tackle the chunk of chronic diseases, the 75% of U.S. healthcare spending that goes into preventable illness, obesity, heart disease, diabetes. And this is the real public health crisis, and I think his attention will be firmly trained there.
Yeah, he was quite clear in his hearings, as you're saying, that he wanted to focus on obesity and other issues and not use the Surgeon General's office as a soapbox to talk about gun safety. But do make the case for us, because one of the things that the NRA has been concerned about in these Republican senators is that Dr. Murthy has advocated for doctors to have the ability to ask patients about having guns in the home. Why is that important to have that ability as a doctor?
Sure. Well, I mean, I see patients every day with depression or anxiety. And if you have someone who's acutely depressed and thinking about suicide, you really want to know if they have a firearm in the home, because
Sure.
It's unfortunately the most efficient way to complete a suicide. Also, if I'm a father of a 3.5-year-old, and leaving loaded weapons around the house sometimes can pose a real hazard to toddlers, to preschoolers, because they just don't understand the lethal potential of a firearm. So the American Academy of Pediatrics is one of the most firm that we need to have the ability to have this conversation with our patients. It's amazing. I don't think we should, squander the First Amendment in sake of the Second.
Yeah.
And it's not that we have to, do anything with the Second Amendment for physicians to be able to do their job and protect their patients' health.
Right. Well, and that is one of the more absurd parts of this story, is the Surgeon General doesn't have anything to do with gun policy. And Governor, when Dr. Lillis makes the case, it seems pretty plain to me, but are these vulnerable senators, red state Democrats, are they right to be this nervous about the NRA?
Let's be clear here. The NRA, the National Republican Advocacy Group, what they're using is a wedge issue. And they're creating this wedge issue so some of these potentially vulnerable Democrats who come from gun states are going to have to decide whether they're going to side with the NRA in this irrational attack on a guy who is a doctor talking about healthcare issues, or whether they're going to say, on the margin, there could be 1 or 2% of the people who are single-issue voters, guns. Which way will I go? And I guess sitting around this table, you say, my God, well, how could this be? But listen, if you take the hypocrites out of politics, ain't nobody left. So
Nobody except you, right?
Yeah, well, present company excluded, of course.
Naturally.
Can we replace the hypocrites with the Hippocratic?
So the bottom line is, when you're asking a senator from Alaska, or a senator from Montana, or a senator from Louisiana, to decide whether they're going to die in the ditch over this particular person, or whether 1 or 2% of these voters might be swayed by the NRA, it's a difficult call for them. But what I would say to them is, the NRA is going to be against you because you are a Democrat.
Right.
You understand me? Democrat. I've been a supporter of the Second Amendment, and the NRA has screwed me on every single election I've been in. Get used to it.
And you still managed to get elected.
Actually, I was reelected with 65% plus.
Right. But, John, politicians are terrified of these little cards that the NRA sends out right before the election telling their membership how they should and shouldn't vote. And the complicated thing is, even though a lot of NRA members support things like universal background checks, when they send out that little postcard with their endorsed candidates, none of that sort of context, none of that detail is in there. So it's just this person supports the Second Amendment and that one doesn't. So do you think it's still justified for red state Democrats to have this much terror of the NRA?
On this one, sure. I think, look, the Surgeon General is by and large, a bit of a ceremonial position. They don't have a lot of authority. They can't promulgate a lot of regulations or anything like that. They sort of set an agenda for the country. But after they got rid of the filibuster, ironically, in the Senate, it now exposes Democrats to being the guys that have to make these decisions.
Right.
And, you know, before they could say, oh, well, Republicans have a filibuster, we couldn't bring up his nomination, we really wanted to, and they never got put on the hook on this thing. Now, they either have to vote for it or vote against it, and if they vote for it, they're going to get that card. And so for most of these Democrats, I think it is a bit of a no-brainer for them. They say, this one we don't want to fight over. If we weren't going to fight over your civil rights nominee, we're sure not going to do this one. So.
And so, yeah, I would take note with that, actually. I disagree, and I think the governor brought up a great point that, if they're framing it, if you want to get into that fight and frame it as versus the NRA, like that may be a harder fight, and then you do get more into the details of what you're talking about, against the card, against Second Amendment, all of that. But reframe it. Reframe it with all the points that you were just making. Like, say, this is really, I will not have this conversation controlled by the NRA. I can say gun. It's not like a dirty word. We can say it, and we can talk about serious safety precautions. We can talk about serious things. But I would think that somebody like Joe Manchin in a state from West Virginia, if the next Surgeon General wants to talk about obesity as his #1 issue, I think that's probably a safe thing for Joe Manchin to be talking about in West Virginia.
The landscape of politics over the last 20 years is sort of littered with Democrats that have periodically stuck their heads up and said, I'm going to fight the NRA, I'm not going to let you frame me, and a lot of them have lost. And I think, these guys look back at that and they say, there's no reason on this one, certainly, for me to get into this fight. Now, I think that sort of speaks to the lack of political will and spine a lot of politicians have these days, but they, I think they look at that and they say, I'm not.
But what happens in red states or purple states with Democrats who are elected is you have to put together a coalition of independents. And these independents are looking for Democrats and Republicans who don't walk the party line on everything. So you've got to find something, whether it's on taxes or choice or guns or whatever it is, not to be the garden variety Democrat that might be from New York or California if you're elected in a square state.
Right. And frequently the issue that red state Democrats pick as the one to be their sort of symbol that I am culturally rural and you can vote for me safely is the gun issue. We're going to have much more on this fight right after this.